On this Monday night, BC's wildfire fight gets a boost. The reinforcements arriving and the restlessness among anxious residents.
Our mountain is on fire, and I have no idea what's happening today.
Restrictions lifted for fully vaccinated Canadian travelers, what they still need to do, and what the changes could mean for the Canada-US border. The remainder of the collapsed Florida condo demolished. How this will help crews with the rescue operation. And making a racket.
It's a dream come true, you know.
The two Canadian tennis stars about to serve up history at Wimbledon.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We begin in British Columbia and the escalating efforts to get those raging wildfires under control. Nearly 100 firefighters from other provinces are set to land in BC tonight. They'll be tested for COVID-19 before being dispatched to regions most in need. Support also coming from the Canadian Armed Forces. It will help airlift fire crews and supplies into and out of wildfire zones and help with emergency evacuations if needed. And crews are now on a new front line, battling a wildfire in the southern Okanagan Valley. The fire is still small, about 1 hectare in size, but it is considered out of control at the present time. It's threatening at least one home, and it's forced the closure of the highway leading to Osoyoos. The area is under a heat warning with temperatures in the low to mid 30s. This is what fire crews are contending with across the province. More than 190 fires are actively burning. More than 60 of them are out of control. 13 are considered wildfires of note, meaning they pose a threat to public safety. And in large parts of BC, the weather has been so hot and dry that the risk of new wildfires starting is considered high to extreme. What happened last week in the village of Lytton is a devastating example of how quickly fires can spread. At least 2 people were killed. Officials say it's now suspected the fire was human-caused. Global's Robin Gill has tonight's top story and the race to contain BC's fires and how communities are coping.
Canham Lake relies on tourism for 2 months in the summer. But no tourists are arriving in this small resort community and reservations are being cancelled.
It would be packed with like 150 people right now, and it's empty. There's nobody here because they're scared.
Now the owner of the main resort is packing up, ready to go at a moment's notice.
My whole life is in a truck and on a boat right now because we might have to go.
Canham Lake is caught between 2 fires. Angus McCurlick spent a sleepless night watching the flames that are creeping toward his house. Just as worrisome are the whipping winds.
It comes back with a vengeance, and without a wind, and when the wind comes, we're in trouble.
Residents of Lytton still aren't allowed to go back to check the damage to their village. 90% of the homes and buildings have been destroyed.
So the investigation into the Lytton Creek fire is being led by the RCMP with the support of the BC Wildfire Service. At this time, it is suspected to be human-caused.
They all started with 1 point of ignition, 1 match, 1 dropped cigarette butt, 1 lightning strike.
Mike Anderson has lived in Deadman's Valley his whole life and knows what kind of damage a fire can do.
If we don't get on top of this, you know, this has devastating effects on First Nations. It has devastating effects on the ranching industry, devastating effects on the forestry industry.
There are 10 active evacuation orders in BC and 5 alerts. The province is holding information meetings for those forced from their homes, and there's a sense of hopelessness.
The situation that we're in right now is not ideal. And many of you folks are out of your places right now. You don't know what's going on. You don't know when you'll be back.
The warm weather isn't ideal, and temperamental winds can turn instantly.
We've just been really lucky with the winds that it hasn't come this way. But if we get unlucky, which our luck will run out at some point, we're in trouble.
Leaving lives and livelihoods in limbo. Robin Gill, Global News, Vancouver.
Today is July 5th. That means new rules are now in effect for Canadian travelers. So starting today, fully vaccinated Canadians returning home can skip quarantine if they test negative. But it's not open season on summer vacation travel just yet. The government is still advising against non-essential travel. Abigail Bimman has the details on the changes.
Pretty ecstatic.
Among the first to arrive back home in Montreal, Bruce Burnett describes himself as a guinea pig for the new rules.
When the flight attendants announced process, they're talking about 3 days in the hotel and quarantine, and said, "You guys are aware that it's changed today?" And they were not aware of the fact. On the plane. They had to call into the ground crew to find out what was going on.
As a fully vaccinated Canadian, he won't need to quarantine, nor will he need a day 8 test, rules that have been frustrating for many.
I told my wife, who was in town with other stuff, that if they don't open up the borders, I'm not coming back. I was ready to stay in Israel as long as necessary.
It's not a fully open border. Only Canadians and others already exempt are allowed in. Everyone still needs to present a negative PCR test result upon arrival and take another when they get here. You also need a new version of ArriveCan to upload proof of vaccination and your test result.
Wow, it was super complicated because also it changed so many times. First was the end of the day. Then like 1 week ago they changed to the beginning of the day. And we already have the flight.
Many still have questions.
I think the biggest challenge that we have is really getting the message out in regards to what has changed.
While the Public Health Agency of Canada put out a new statement stressing it is still not the time to travel.
I know how eager people are to get things back to normal, but things aren't normal yet.
Calling Monday's rule change a big step at an announcement in Northern Ontario, the Prime Minister was pressed on the next steps for a fulsome reopening and why vaccinated Americans are still not welcome.
We're going to stay safe, but we're very hopeful that we're going to be able to see new steps on reopening announced in the coming weeks.
Coming weeks. Trudeau said the same thing 2 weeks ago. All eyes are now on July 21st for the next chance of reopening. Monday, the Prime Minister said the next phase, whenever announced, would allow other fully vaccinated people to enter Canada. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford says his government is guaranteeing it will keep the temporary wage bump brought in during the pandemic for personal support workers. Right now, those who staff long-term care homes and similar facilities get an extra $3 per hour. The benefit's been extended until August 23rd, but Ford says he's committed to keeping it.
I've always said folks, PSWs are overworked, underpaid, and they deserve every single penny times 10. So we're going to keep that in place, the $3 an hour pay for them.
The pay bump has been in place since last October, affecting more than 158,000 workers. At today's COVID briefing in Nova Scotia, things took a turn with a surprise admission from the Premier.
In 2003, I was found to be driving under the influence. I was fined and my license was suspended for 1 year. 2 years later, I was charged with the same offense, but was eventually found to be innocent.
Ian Rankin says he makes no excuses for his behavior and is sorry. The 38-year-old also says he disclosed the information when he ran for the Liberal leadership. Rankin, who had never addressed the charges publicly, says they weren't a secret, but heard people asking questions about the cases and wanted to explain. There has also been widespread speculation about a looming election call. Just days before the start of the much-anticipated Calgary Stampede, City Council has voted to repeal its mask rules. The change isn't fully in effect, but it will bring the city in line with the rest of Alberta and BC, where mask rules ended last week. Now, Calgary's mayor says he's confident public safety isn't being put at risk, but as Heather Urex-West explains, not all experts agree.
Open for business, no mask required. Dining out in Western Canada is now looking more and more like it did before COVID-19.
It's just a nice step to feel like we're going back to normal.
It feels great. Feels like we got out of jail.
Mayor Nenshi?
Yes.
That is carried, Your Worship, 10-4.
Calgary City Council voted 10-4 Monday to repeal its mask bylaw, putting the city in line with the rest of the province.
Infection rates are almost as low as they were when we put in the bylaw last summer, and hospitalization and ICU rates are still higher than they were last summer, but they're really trending downward.
BC and Alberta both rescinded their provincial mask mandates on July 1st, while Saskatchewan's mandate could be lifted as early as next week. But provincial territorial mask mandates remain in effect in all other parts of the country and could remain in place for several months. Toronto's bylaw won't be up for debate again until the fall.
We are not seeing any widespread dissemination of any of the new, more dangerous variants. And the vaccine program is going very well.
Dr. Brian Conway says removing mask policies now makes sense, though he believes they may be required again if outbreaks take hold.
In my opinion, I'd like to see us hang on to the mask bylaw a little bit longer. And the reason why I say that is, although we have really good first dose vaccine coverage, we're still lagging behind a little bit in the second doses.
While more than 75% of Canadians 12 and over have received a first dose of vaccine, less than a third of the population is fully vaccinated.
And unfortunately, the current version of the virus that's out there in the community, this Delta variant, is actually pretty good at infecting people that only have one shot of vaccine.
Calgary's bylaw change also means masks will no longer be required for indoor venues at the Calgary Stampede, which kicks off later this week with thousands set to attend. Heather Urex West, Global News, Calgary.
And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says people in England will no longer have to wear masks in indoor public spaces or keep 1 meter apart when restrictions lift as planned in 2 weeks' time, though masks will still be recommended in some enclosed spaces. England is planning to move to its final stage of its reopening plan July 19th, but with warnings about a rise in cases due to the highly transmissible Delta variant, a final decision will be made next week.
I want to stress from the outset that this pandemic is far from over. It certainly won't be over by the 19th. As we predicted in the roadmap in February, we're seeing cases rise fairly rapidly. There could be 50,000 cases detected per day by the 19th.
64% of people in the UK are fully vaccinated. Britain has recorded more than 128,000 deaths from COVID-19. That is the most in Western Europe. And Britain's royal family says the Duchess of Cambridge is self-isolating after coming into contact with someone who later tested positive for COVID-19. Kate was supposed to attend events with Prince William today to celebrate the 73rd birthday of Britain's National Health Service. The palace says the Duchess, who's fully vaccinated, has no symptoms. She began her 10-day self-isolation period on Friday after spending most of the day at the Wimbledon Tennis Championship. The collapsed Florida condo reduced to rubble. Coming up, what rescue crews can do now as they search for victims. Plus, gunmen storm a Nigerian school. The abduction of more than 100 students. Dozens of homes gone in seconds. A controlled demolition brought down what remained of that collapsed condo building in Surfside, Florida. Miami-Dade County's mayor ordered the demolition, saying it was critical to expand the scope of the search for victims. There were concerns about the structure's stability. Officials were also worried strong winds from the approaching tropical storm Elsa could pose even further safety risks at the site. Despite the fact that the likelihood of finding survivors lessens by the day, officials are still calling this a search and rescue mission. The bodies of 3 more victims have been found in the rubble, and that brings the death toll to 28. 117 people remain unaccounted for, and 4 Canadians are listed among those missing. Jackson Prosco looks at the next steps.
It took just seconds to bring down the biggest threat in the search for the missing. A staged implosion toppled the damaged structure away from the debris pile, where dozens remain unaccounted for.
We wanted to move that building, if we could safely do so, so that we could gain access to that pile.
Wiping out the remainder of the Champlain Tower meant destroying survivors' personal belongings. It was just too unsafe to recover anything. Without the threat of further collapse, crews can now dig with heavy equipment for the first time, gaining access to areas where it's believed the majority of the victims are located.
Because that newly accessible area where it was, that happened to be where a lot of the master bedrooms are.
It's still officially a rescue operation. Officials acknowledge there's little hope of finding survivors.
There's a lot of families and friends that are still hoping to recover their loved ones.
Betty Matzgelski's close friend Graziella Catarasi and her 7-year-old daughter were among the victims recovered. The rest of the family is still missing.
In Graciella's apartment was herself, her daughter, her sister Andrea, and her parents. And as far as I know, only Graciela and her daughter have been recovered. The other 3 still remain to be found.
Rescue crews insist the only thing that will slow them down now is the weather. Tropical storm Elsa is expected to hit Florida later this week. It won't make a direct hit on Surfside, but could still deliver heavy rain.
The search will continue for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until we pull everybody out of that rubble.
All the while, debris is carted away for forensic analysis, continuing the search for answers amidst the search for victims. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Ahead, what caused this explosion in the Caspian Sea? This is a fiery explosion off the coast of Azerbaijan last night. It was a mud volcano erupting on a small island in the Caspian Sea. Azerbaijan is known for its mud volcanoes. There are hundreds of them, onshore and offshore, due to the country's vast oil and gas fields. Azerbaijan nicknames itself the Land of Fire and is famous for a site where natural gas vents out of fissures in the ground, igniting into what are essentially eternal flames. It is the last day on the job for Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. Bezos founded Amazon 27 years ago today. It started as an online book retailer. He, of course, grew that company into a $1.7 trillion tech titan, and it made him one of the richest men in the world. Andy Jassy, who has led Amazon's web services since 2006, is going to take the helm. Bezos will serve as the company's executive chair. The 57-year-old also plans to turn his focus onto other projects like space travel. Later this month, he's scheduled to join the first crewed flight of the new Shepherded rocket built by his aerospace company, Blue Origin. At least 140 students have been kidnapped from a school in northwestern Nigeria. Families of the children are desperate for news on their loved ones. Police say a gunman overpowered school security guards, broke through a wall, and entered a dormitory early this morning. A teacher and about 25 students escaped. More than 800 students have been abducted in Nigeria since December. Most have been released after negotiations, but at least 150 remain missing. Virtual date night, no more. Next, cross-border couples back together physically as border rules ease. It's the moment many Canadians have been waiting for, reuniting with loved ones after a long, long separation. Canada's easing of COVID-19 travel restrictions allows fully vaccinated Canadians and permanent residents to enter the country without having to quarantine. The rules have been a burden for cross-border couples, keeping apart throughout much of this pandemic. As Mike Drolet explains, the roadblocks are still, though, in place for some.
In the shadow of the giant Peace Arch monument straddling the U.S.-Canada border sits a grassy haven from the unforgiving confines of COVID rules. There's no wall or border station here. It's witnessed weddings and now has pop-up tents for people to reunite and share more private moments. But that's just here. The rules everywhere else have been complicated, which is why Melinda Schneider is happy her mum is a lawyer.
I have someone who reads that all day, every day. So for her, she's like, oh, it means this. Whereas like I'm looking at it and it's like throwing me back to calculus and giving me PTSD.
The teacher's college student had to figure it out so she could see her boyfriend Adrian, who lives and works in Denmark. They managed to visit each other last year, once in Denmark, another time in Canada. But the financial and emotional burdens of COVID started to become too much.
Like I got laid off and then it's like, oh, now my boyfriend can't come and oh, I have no freedom and oh, I can't leave my house. And then it's like, oh, I can't have my friends over. I can't see my family.
But now with new rules meant to ease travel restrictions for fully vaccinated Canadians, she sees a pathway towards normalcy.
I feel a little more free because it's like, like I've done my part. You know what I mean?
But that freedom isn't assured for couples across the board, since benefits aren't yet extended to fully vaccinated foreign nationals. So when Dr. David Poon's partner arrives from Ireland this week, the mandatory 15-day stay still applies.
So a Canadian essentially has full mobility. A foreign national family member of a Canadian does not.
He'd like to see that change soon, but nothing COVID-related seems to move quickly. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Farah Nasser. Thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is West Beach in Port Hope, Ontario. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other.